Hi class, good afternoon. I'm going to be talking with you about the second portion of week 4. And it's chapter 5 and chapter 6 from the Corey and Corey text. You see that listed there. I have one portion of this video, which is the other textbook, The Basics of California Law and Ethics. That portion of that text I recorded in a separate video. I'm going to go over these chapters separately. Sorry I did it that way. It's just the way it worked out with me just getting a chance to record them. So I wanted to go over this. This week we're talking about informed consent, um, internet counseling, working with minors, and then confidentiality. And those are huge things. Informed consent is something that you give your clients as soon as you meet with them. It is something usually you hand in paper form or electronic form, and it lets them know all information about counseling, what it is, the cost of therapy that was kind of mentioned before, what their rights are as a client, um, who you are, um, who's allowed to their information. Talks about mandated reporting and informed consent. It's a document that needs to be signed. Now, probably something that would be added to informed consent, and this is um, a new rule that is put out there. But um, we are to give our clients um, information about how to complain about us as clinicians. And as of July 1st, that's a new thing. So for all new clients, we need to make sure that we give that to them. And to old clients, we now have to hand them out a flyer or something showing how they can complain to the board about us as clinicians if they feel that's necessary. Um, so informed consent, like I said, something you sign. If you've ever seen a therapist, it's probably something similar. A lot of times, clients won't read that information, but it is something that we're required to give, and that's on them to not read the information. Like I said, the following information should be on there. Again, they have the right to their file, rights pertaining to diagnostic labeling, the nature and purpose of confidentiality, the benefits and risks of treatment, about like you're not like you can't record sessions without their permission. So if you're at a site that records all sessions, how you go about doing that, if they have to mark a box yes or no. At one of the sites I work at, it's a training facility, and so um, sometimes recording is used for educational purposes. And so what we will do is we will ask for permission from the beginning, and if that is an option, then our clinicians will potentially record with them. If that is not an option, then we will know not to record with them. Okay, you can't record something against someone's will. It's against the law. Record keeping. This is huge. Notes, right? Note taking. Now, every place, every facility you choose to work at will be a little bit different. Private practice looks a little bit different, but record keeping is an ethical obligation. It provides a history. It's something you can review as time goes on. Records can assist practitioners improving the quality of care. From a legal perspective, it's state and federal law may require keeping a record. Many practitioners believe that accurate and detailed clinical records can provide an excellent defense against malpractice claims. Now, that is true. However, that doesn't mean like when you're face to face with the client um, that you write down every single little detail that they say. I think it's just demonstrating like the basics of like harm to self, harm to others. Are they in compliance with their medication? Any self harm thoughts? Basic notes on like what your treatment is, what their diagnosis is. It's not a play by play of every word they say. Plus, if a client ever needs their records or somebody else wants their records for court purposes, then it becomes a problem because it's too much information. Anyways, with all that said, you just want to make sure you're clear, concise, and cover all your bases. Okay, there's SUDS notes, SOAP notes, a lot of different styles of notes that might be more specific in another course, probably like professional practice or things of that nature. But you do need to keep notes, okay? It's a way to, again, like if someone says that they're harming themselves and then you don't report on it and you have that in your note, that's problematic. Or if you have nothing in your notes and somebody does, that's a problem. So you want to make sure that you're being conscientious of those things. Um, You have to store your client's notes in a secure place. Um, so sometimes that means with modern day society, that's in the technology world. So you want to make sure it's a secure server, whatever site that's at, like that it can't be invaded. A lot of people say the safest place with notes still are paper notes because like they're behind two locked doors usually. That's the requirement. They're behind a filing cabinet that's locked, an office door that's locked. But then you're like, what do I do with all my old notes? You are required to hold notes for a period of time. I believe it is 7 years that you have to hold notes for. And if you're treating minors, you have to hold the notes until they're 18 years old. So for some of you, that could be like, oh my gosh, that could be a ton of notes. And in some ways, yes, it could be. Now, some of your sites will take care of that for you. If you're private practice, you have to take care of that yourself. So I have to store my notes. Now, surprisingly though, like of over 10 years of practicing, I have like 4 boxes full of notes that are like have different years of when I can get rid of them. Which really honestly is not that. I would have thought it would have been a lot worse. But you could see after years and years and years and years of doing this, 4 boxes could turn into a lot more. So, you have to do whatever's best for you, but you have to make sure it's secure because you need to protect your client's confidentiality. And if they need their records back, you want to make sure you know how to find them. Okay. Some places pay storage fees for like, there's special, I don't know what it looks like, a warehouse, but they will store records for doctors, for therapists, things of that nature. And that's a cost monthly usually. Um, so again, usually fees, billings, documentation of waivers of confidentiality, presenting complaint and diagnosis, plan for service, client reactions to professional interventions, things that could be included in notes. Okay. Um, so again, when you start out as a trainee, you want to talk to whoever your supervisor is. Find out what their expectation is in note taking. There should be some level of probably training on that. You're not going to be winging it, okay? But it's important that you stay on top of it. I think it's a fair expectation, and I see it as almost ethical. You're not going to get an ACA code that says this, but I think as far as good practice, and sometimes we have to think that way as therapists, like what's in good practice, what's immoral, what's my own moral code here is don't wait too long to do your notes. Like you don't want to be writing notes about a client you saw a month ago. So you want to try to use your time efficiently, that you're seeing your clients, writing your notes, seeing your next client, writing your note, so that you don't lose track of what was going on with the person and what. Now, I know some places have very tedious notes and that's not possible, but if it is, the quicker you can do it or at the end of each day, the more efficient it will be and the more clear and concise it will be with what's actually going on versus trying to go back and remember. Okay. Online counseling. Okay, so when these slides were made in 2015, um, some of these slides at least, um, you know, online counseling wasn't what it is right now. And online counseling has turned into quite the thing as of recently, because when this was talked about, we didn't have a pandemic. So HIPAA laws protected often from online counseling because of confidentiality, secure servers, things of that nature that you had to really take into consideration before you could even do online counseling. Okay. And now when COVID hit, like all that went out the window, like worrying about a secure server. Um, Liability insurance did cover like seeing clients like virtually, but it was just a whole new world and we were forced to just like jump right in, and that wasn't the case before all this. So different states have different rules, okay, different laws. So treating someone who is not in your state and is out of state, that could raise a major problem, right? They have different codes, different laws. You could run into some major problems. Now, if you're LPCC, that may not be the same, but it's still something to be mindful of. Like, when a person comes into your office, there's some level of control of like, at least they're in front of you. At least they're alone. Um, there's no distraction. If you needed to call the police or if you needed to help them get into treatment or if you needed to call a family member to come and get them, you have a little bit more control in those situations. When someone is home, you don't necessarily have at all that control. So, I think it's important when you're doing online counseling, um, that you're aware of those things. Like one, like checking like where is your client? Like, are you home? Um, are you feeling like you can talk? Like, are you in a room where you feel like it's confidential, where like you can open up, where you can talk? Um, do you, are you harmed to yourself? All those things. Like, what's the nearest hospital or a family member I can call just in case those are the things. I supervised some people who work with minors, and those were some of the questions we had asked because minutes still had to be made for their IEPs, and that's an individual educational plan. Um, and we had to make sure that the kids are safe, and um, that meant an adult being present. So those aren't things you have to worry about when they're in their classrooms. That's not something you have to worry about when someone is um, in your office, but that is something you have to worry about when they're on the World Wide Web. Okay. Now, I used a platform called Doxy, and it's for medical professionals or um, therapists. A lot of people have used Zoom, Google Hangout, a couple different platforms to do virtual counseling. And literally, I went from never using my computer to being on my computer for over 8 hours a day, which is insane. Okay, so again, um, you know, you want to make sure like the online therapy, I think, is now going to have like a whole new meaning after virtual therapy, after this season. I think even in the medical field, so many of us have seen our doctors, talk to specialists. Like I've done so many kid appointments over, like when I'm saying kid appointments, I mean my own kids' pediatric appointments over the phone or over FaceTime. Um, I think it's just opening a whole new door, a way of communication that we have been kind of hesitant about as clinicians. And so now I think it's going to be a thing. Like I have a lot of clients that come from Orange County who travel a distance, and they're really limited on what times they can come in, dealing with traffic and yada, yada, yada. And so I can see how they're going to prefer to do virtual counseling over doing things in person just because of convenience. There is a lot of conveniences in it, but there are some inconveniences. Like I mentioned, I've had some scenarios with confidentiality happen that never would have happened if the person came to my office. Okay, like them feeling like they need a whisper, being distracted. That doesn't happen when they're in the room sitting in front of me. Okay. And when I'm talking with them, I'm talking to them as if I would be in my office, and I'm talking very openly and very freely. And sometimes it's about family members, and I get a little nervous about sometimes speaking openly because I don't know who's listening. Also, I had a situation arise where a husband who was not in a great place with his wife recorded two of our therapy sessions unknowingly because we were doing them virtually, and then he recorded them. And so he wasn't very happy with some of the things that she said, but it wasn't his place to hear it. And that would have, again, never happened if she had met with me at my home, or I mean, in my office. So it's just, there's some trickiness to it. And I think it's, at least from my perspective, being virtual has been a little bit more draining on me, just because of it's just the in person. It's just different, it's just different. So those are things to think about. But it is, I think, something that we're going to face more often than not after this experience, and as this COVID experience continues. There's just people who don't feel comfortable really leaving their homes or coming to the office, which they're entitled to, and like we can't limit them just because we don't want to do virtual therapy. So, it's going to be part of our therapeutic world. So just be mindful of that. You want to make sure when you're doing virtual therapy, sometimes it was happening in places outside of our offices as a clinician, that you're in a place where you have confidentiality, where you're not going to be distracted, where your client will feel safe that nobody else is listening on to the conversation. And so those are some things to be aware of, because that could be a huge breach of confidentiality for a client. Okay. So, and there's going to be certain methods that aren't going to look exactly the same with online therapy. We've found a way to do EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, through the internet. It's not exactly the same, but it's something we can at least try, and that's helpful for clients. And you have to go over the limits of confidentiality and informed consent and all those things that you would do in person over the internet. I've gained quite a few clients during this season, and all of them had to do all the paperwork and things of that nature. I mean, luckily now it's like with email and whatnot, you can like send things so much easier, and people can do electronic signatures and whatnot, but it's still part of that process. Like the only difference is you're not face to face. Okay. Working with children and adolescents, important things to consider: minors' rights regarding informed consent. So, depending on age, like they're allowed and they're entitled to sign for that. They're allowed to know about what therapy is and what expectation are. Parental rights to information about a minor's treatment. Minors um, assent versus consent, and involving parents in the counseling process with minors. Those are all things you have to think about. Now, some of you really want to work with children, and that's great. Not everybody wants to, but like we need somebody that does. And so when you're working with kids, you're going to be working a lot of times with their parents or dealing with their parents. When I work with a minor and I bring them in, I go over all the limits of confidentiality with mom and or dad with kid, because I want them to know that their child is entitled to their confidentiality. And I want kid to know that mom or dad can't call me and be like, well, what did you guys talk about? Because it's none of their business. Now, I am for families, and I am for families working together. And what I tell the child is like, if I ever feel like there's something we need to talk to your mom and dad about, I'm never going to talk about it with your mom and dad without you being aware of it, you being in the room about it, or you giving me permission to talk to them about it. Because I want everyone to be on the same page. If a child's not feeling loved or not feeling heard or understood, and like we don't ever talk to the parents about it, that could be problematic. Now, maybe we don't, because the parents are maybe really difficult people, they're not safe people, and so like it's pointless to have that conversation and it's not worth it. But a lot of parents want to be of help and service to their kids. It's just they don't know what they need. And so I think it's a beautiful way to incorporate family and to like solve problems, and maybe for a child to feel differently. But like again, I always let kids know I'm not going to talk to your parent about something that I don't tell you that I'm going to talk to them about. Parents sometimes assume, well, I'm paying you, so I get to know. And it's like, no, there's still limits of confidentiality even working with a child. Okay. Um, so again, something to be mindful of. You can claim privilege on behalf of your kid um, client in order to protect them, and parents, it's they may eventually get that information if they go through the court system, but just because they ask, you don't have to give it right away. You're doing things in the best interest of your client, and especially in divorce situations, it can get really sticky with parents because sometimes parents have agendas, and so just being very mindful of, just because you're putting this pressure on me because you're going through this situation doesn't mean I have to do it. And I have to do what's in the best interest of my client. And my client is not you as mom or dad. My client is kid. And you have to stand up for that child. Because again, like you're not there to represent mom or represent dad. You're there to represent the child. And so that's where organizations like CAMP are really helpful, which is California Marriage and Family Therapists Association. Because they have legal representation. You can call 24 hours, or well, not 24 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and ask these questions, because it's very easy to get caught up in a situation and feel like this pressure of like, oh gosh, like I feel I have to do what they're saying, when in all actuality you don't. And it's very liberating, and helpful. So just something to be aware of. Okay, so unethical behavior of colleagues, like we're professional. Um, so just be aware of like how you're acting around other people. Um, and, we are going to be dealing, I'm reading this book about a therapist and her work with her clients. And the reality is like, it's hard to ask for help when you're in the helping profession, right? And so there might be times for all of us where we come across a moment where we need help and we don't address issues, and then we act out in different ways that aren't good. So maybe we have mental health issues, maybe we've developed a drinking problem, drug problem, I don't know, all kinds of things, right? We act out in certain ways that aren't good. And so that makes us then, potentially capable of doing unethical things or things that wouldn't be wise. So you can report a colleague to a professional board. Because again, nobody wants malpractice. Nobody wants to be in that kind of situation. So for a malpractice situation, these are the things that have to be present. A professional relationship between the therapist and the client must have existed. The therapist must have acted in a negligent or improper manner. The client must have suffered harm or injury which must be verified, and there must be a legally demonstrated causal relationship between the practitioner's negligence or breach of duty and the damage or injury claimed by the client. So that's where I go on to say with malpractice, it's not something that won't be investigated, okay? So reasons for malpractice: failure to obtain document informed consent, refusal to counsel clients due to value differences. That's what we talked about last week. Client abandonment or premature termination, like meaning like, peace out, I'm done. And like the client's like, wait a second, wait, what? Like there should be some natural transition and like referral process before like you stop seeing a client, unless the client has decided they're done. Marked departures from established therapeutic practices, sexual misconduct, which we talked about, practicing outside of your scope and doing things that you shouldn't be, misdiagnosing, repressed or false memory. This is something that came up a lot with Freud, and saying that there's these false memories or repressed memories that are there when really like potentially they weren't. And you have to be very careful with that. And I have a lot of clients that are afraid of repressed memory. And I say, I can't tell you if you're gonna have repressed memory or not. I'm not in your brain. I don't know. So I don't go there with them. I said, things may come up for me that you don't remember, but they may not. And that doesn't mean, just because you can't remember periods of your life doesn't mean you had this like terrible life or something. Okay. And then again, failure to assess and manage dangers of your clients. Okay. So again, we don't want to be sued. Nobody wants to be sued. I really don't want to be sued ever. And so it's just, we want to be cautious, and you've worked too hard. Like I will say this every week, but you work too hard to get where you are to have like this kind of scenario happen. Okay. And so you just want to be very conscientious of those things. Okay. So confidentiality is the client's right to privacy, and it's our duty to protect that. Okay, so what's privileged communication? It's a legal concept that generally bars the disclosure of confidential communications in a legal proceeding. So like when I said you can claim privilege on your client, you can claim that people don't have the privilege to get certain information from you. And so you hold that privilege. It's my privilege, not your privilege. Now, that can change from state to state, okay? And what's privacy? It's the constitutional right of individuals to be left alone and to control their personal information. Okay, so again, HIPAA laws, that's what talks about privacy. Now, HIPAA a lot of times is used in a medical billing kind of thing because it talks about some of those things in there, but we can use HIPAA with therapy. Now, school districts don't use HIPAA because HIPAA is usually involving medical billing and things of that nature. They have FERPA, which is a kind of confidentiality with kids and parents and things of that nature. But once a child is 18 years old, like parents, like this happens in doctor's offices, right? Once a child's 18 years old, like a parent can't go in a doctor's office and ask any information about the kid. And so that's the same with therapy. Like once a child is of a certain age, they have the right to their confidentiality outside of the parents. Okay. And so that's something to be mindful of. I believe kids can start consenting to their own treatment at the age of 12. Okay. So limits of confidentiality: when a clerical assistant handles confidential information, when a counselor consults, when a counselor is being supervised, when a client has given consent, when a client possesses danger to self or others, right? We breach confidentiality. Okay. Now, when you guys are in supervision, that's what they're talking about with the supervisor. It's not a breach of confidentiality because you were required to talk to your supervisors. What I always tell clients is, when I was a trainee or then an intern, now associate is what you would call you guys now, but I would let them know, like, I'm under supervision, so if I have to talk about my cases, so I will be talking about my cases there, but outside of there, that's it. I would use the word umbrella. I speak about my cases within the umbrella of the counseling center. And that's just a way to let people know, like, hey, I may talk about your case there, but it's not breaching your confidentiality, and it's held with the utmost respect and dignity and all those kinds of things. When a client discloses intention to commit a crime, we have to breach confidentiality. When a counselor suspects abuse of neglect or a child or a vulnerable adult. So this is how I start my sessions, every session. Well, every new client, okay, I should say. And any new person that joins therapy. Sometimes I have clients that bring in like a family member or a spouse or a kid, and I go over this with anybody who joins therapy for the first time. Hi, my name is Tony Hawergi. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist, and as a licensed marriage family therapist, I'm a mandated reporter. So if you were to tell me harm to self, others, elder abuse, or child abuse, I have to report. Otherwise, everything stays within the confines of this room. Do you have any questions? That's my spiel. So you will have a similar spiel at the beginning of every session, and that's just to let people know, like you hand them all this paperwork, like informed consent, HIPAA, all these things. They don't read it. Client of service agreement, they don't read it. Okay. Some people will. You'll have those people that will, but most people, 90% of people, aren't going to read it. So just be mindful of that. Okay. And that's why we go over liability and mandated reporting straight out, so people don't like feel offended if you have to report. They may feel offended regardless, but um, that way they don't feel offended, when you're reporting. Again, just with whatever devices you're using for phone, things of that nature, you need to be cautious. You want to ensure privacy. So that's even with text messaging, just to be conscientious, like you want to ensure privacy. I don't save clients' numbers in my phone. Like my phone is what I use for business and for my personal phone. Now, some people will want to separate it, and that's fine. But I don't save numbers. So I'm like, if anybody ever picked up my phone, I don't want them to be able to see like, oh, who's this person, and see their name to it. So you just want to exercise caution when using telecommunications and devices. HIPAA. If you submit a claim electronically, which is what I do for my billing, my insurance billing, HIPAA is one of those standards. So privacy, how we do electronic transactions, security requirements, and national identifier requirements. So I have to have special national identifier requirements to submit claims electronically. Their medical records are like they're signing knowing like their medical records are sent back and forth, but they're sent but with the utmost standards, things of that nature. Balancing client confidentiality and protecting the public can be a major challenge, right? We need to potentially protect potential victims, clients who are potentially going to do physical harm, and we have to step out of our confidentiality and report, right? And we don't want to be in trouble or have a situation happen where we have deep regret, right? And you never want to be the person's therapist or the person who decided to be an active shooter or make a crime or whatever, right? Because it's very easy to point the finger, but it's a whole other thing when the shoe's on the other foot, and that's you sitting in that chair and you're like, oh my gosh, this is going on. Like, what do I need to do? Okay. So liability for civil damage, the responsibility to protect the public from dangerous acts of violence entails liability for civil damages when practitioners neglect to diagnose or predict the dangerousness, failing to warn potential victims, failing to commit dangerous individuals, prematurely discharging dangerous clients from a hospital. And this is where we have Tarasoff case. So that was the duty to warn of harm to self or others. And in that case, I believe a young woman died. And it was talked about in therapy that the guy was going to go do that, and he did, and that's why we have Tarasoff. Bradley case, duty not to negligently release a dangerous client. And then I'm going to butcher this person's names, but Jablonski case, duty to commit a dangerous individual. Okay. And it's hard, right? These are hard decisions we have to make, and we're put in a hard place sometimes, but it's for the overall good of the community and maybe a person as whole. So consult with an attorney if you're not clear about your legal duty, the supervisor or colleague, know the relevant laws in your state, inquire about a client's access to weapons, homicidal ideation, intention. You as a clinician have every right to ask, and don't be afraid to ask those questions from a client. Consider all appropriate steps to take their consequences, obtain prior medical and behavioral history, know and follow the policy of your institution, and in cases of immediate threat by a client, do not hesitate to take steps to prevent harm to yourself. Your safety matters. That's typically why therapists sit close to their door. Your safety matters. You matter. You got to keep yourself safe, okay? And in cases involving the duty to warn and protect, document all actions, document, 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 cover yourself, right? Make referrals when appropriate. And it's hard, like in school settings, that's tricky, right? Because, like, it's a minor and all